Alright, hi everyone. Today we're going to take a look at conflict. First we're going to define what conflict is, and then we'll take a look at a couple of different types. So, by definition, conflict is the tension in the story between opposing forces. So there are two things that are in conflict with one another, that are opposing one another, and that's going to create the conflict in the story. So when we take a look at a couple of different types of conflict, one of the most common is person versus person. So this is when two characters are in opposition to one another. So their goals or their objectives are going to clash, and the two are not going to get along. So a lot of the time this can be considered as a hero versus a villain. And just for example, you might think of it kind of like the Batman and Joker rivalry, where the two are both trying to have different very effects on Gotham, and they come into conflict with one another and have that rivalry back and forth. Person versus self is a little bit different. This is when a person struggles with his or her own beliefs, feelings, and that sort of thing. So you might have a story about somebody struggling with depression, and in that case they're sort of trying to overcome their own attitudes, their own feelings, in order to change their lives. So person versus self is when you have some sort of inner conflict, whether that's depression or self-doubt or anything like that, where you really have to try to change the way that you live your life. Person versus society is sort of like person versus person, but on a much larger scale. So this is where a character is in opposition to large numbers of people, or maybe they're in conflict with the way that society works. So if you think about something like the Hunger Games, we've got Katniss Everdeen, and she's leading a charge against a corrupt government. So here she's up against a whole system, a whole body that is going to try and act against her. And so person versus society really just demands that there's one character going against all sorts of people all at once. Person versus nature is when a character struggles, and often it's for survival in the wilderness or dealing with some sort of natural force. So for example, this would be somebody trying to survive in a hurricane, or maybe somebody trying to live on a desert island, that sort of conflict where they have to exist in the world and it causes problems for them. Person versus supernatural is much different in that it's a character that struggles against things in the world that are supernatural or paranormal, or really just don't follow the same laws and physics that we know about today. So for example, if you've got a character trying to live in a haunted house, they're in a supernatural conflict. It's not something that can easily be explained, and it's something that they have to overcome if they're going to live peacefully. So they might have to come up against ghosts and other strange events in that house in order to really find a place to live that's going to work for them. Person versus technology is when a character struggles with the influence of technology, or sometimes literally with the technology in society. So for example, in something like The Matrix, there's a character that's struggling against robots that are harvesting people basically as batteries. And so in a situation like that, you've very literally got characters that are robots, and somebody is trying to resist them, and it causes a conflict. Sometimes it can be a little more subtle. So for example, a character might resist being brainwashed by television and by radio waves. In a situation like that, technology is still the root of the conflict, but there's not really a literal character that is considered to be technology. So person versus technology really just demands that they're trying to cope with the way that technology has developed around them. So that concludes a couple different types of conflict. To test out your knowledge on